السلام ورحمة الله وبركاته. السلام ورحمة الله. طيب، إن الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا. من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له، وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له، وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله صلى الله عليه وعلى آله وصحبه من سار على سبيله إلى يوم الدين. أما بعد. So in continuing from the chapter of At-Tahara, we was discussing last lesson manners regarding دخول الخلاء, entering the place of relieving oneself, والاستنجاء والاستجمار, and purifying oneself. So inshallah ta'ala, we will continue from what is considered to be personal hygiene. We started to speak about the siwak also, isn't it? Miswak, usage of the miswak. Okay, we spoke about that already. The times that it's recommended for a person to use the miswak. So the last thing that we began to mention was the things that the Prophet Muhammad recommended to do, beginning with the right. Of the things that is mentioned is al-iqtihal, or any استعمال الدهون أو الزيت, الدهان, oiling oneself, to start with the right. اقتحال, using al-kuhl on the eye, that a person starts with the right also. Also of the things mentioned, نظر ونظر في المرآة, and also looking in the mirror. That person should look in the mirror to look at themselves to make sure that they're presentable and the likes. Regarding al-iqtihal, also what is mentioned now, Shaykh Islam ibn Taymiyyah, he mentions يفعل ما هو الأصلح للبدن من الإدهان أو غيره كالغسل بماء حار ببلد رطب. So he mentions also from the things that take into consideration, the Muslim should do that which is most befitting, most beneficial to his body, to their body. That includes bathing in hot water also. For example, if you lived in a place that was quite humid or moist, then you can bathe in hot water, because that will be more beneficial for you than bathing in cold water. And in some situations, bathing in cold water will be more beneficial for your body than bathing in hot water. So when it comes to these things, from this we understand that from the sunnah of the Prophet Muhammad is also a person taking care of their own personal hygiene and maintenance. So the thing of iqtihal, that is mentioned that the person is sunnah to use kuhl in each eye 3 times, to use 3 times, to wipe 3 times with the kuhl every night before bed, before sleeping. That's sunnah. Lima rawa ibn Abbas, that is collected by Ibn Abbas عنهما أن النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم كان يكتحل بالإثمد كل ليلة قبل أن ينام وكان يكتحل في كل عين 3 أميال. So he mentioned, and yes, in Imam Ahmed, ولكن هذا الحديث ضعيف. This hadith is ضعيف. So he mentioned that the Prophet would, before he went to sleep, would in each eye wipe 3 times with kuhl, apply kuhl, لكن هذا الحديث ضعيف. But then he mentions الاقتحال, the usage of kuhl, ينقسم إلى قسمين, is divided into two categories. أن يكون المقصود صلاح العين وتقوية النظر فيستحب لأن المسلم مأمور بحفظ البدن. So here it mentions the first category of using al-kuhl is if your intention is for the rectification of your eye and strengthening of your sight, then it's recommended because the Muslim is commanded to preserve their body. So here it's recommended for a person to use kuhl. Why? If there's a benefit for your eyesight, for example, if it's going to help your eyesight, because this is underneath the command of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that you are to preserve your body. The secondly, أن يكون لمجرد التزين والتجمل فلا يخلو. So here it mentions the second means of using kuhl is that is for beautification, and you just for beautification alone. Then this is not void of the following: أن تكون امرأة متزوجة فيستحب لها ذلك لأن المرأة يطلب منها أن تتجمل لزوجها. So for example, the first thing mentioned is for a woman who is married to use it as a form of beautification for her husband. Secondly, أن يكون رجلا أو امرأة غير متزوجة فيباح. So he mentions so as for the woman who's married, it's recommended for her to use it as a means to present herself for her husband, to make herself more beautified. As for the man and the woman who's not married, then it is mubah. What does mubah mean? You can remember? It's permissible. i.e. there's no reward and there's no blame, there's no punishment. Okay? إلا إذا كان سيترتب عليه فتنة فإنه يحرم. So look, this is a qaida, a principle now. Except that, because regarding things that are not religious, the asl is that it's mubah, it's the asl is that it's permissible, except if there's going to come fitna from this. If fitna is going to come from this, then it is not permissible. So this necessitates that a person, when looking at matters, they look at it with understanding of the implications of the action. So sometimes the ruling of something isn't just based on the thing itself, but the things that is attributed to it. Let's say, give you an example. Buying a kitchen knife. What's the ruling of this? Mubah. Now, but if I know, for example, that this person's going to buy this knife, kitchen knife, with the intention of harming someone, what's the ruling of selling that person that knife? Haram. But in general, it's what? Mubah. But if there's a fitna that is attached to this, then it becomes haram. So, also what is mentioned, yusannu, is also from the sunnah to look in the mirror. And the hadith that is mentioned is da'if also. You have those who say that the Prophet ﷺ, in the hadith Aisha mentions, كان رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم إذا نظر في المرآة قال الحمد لله اللهم كما أحسنت خلقي فأحسن خلقي. But again, they say this hadith is da'if. That mentions that when the Prophet ﷺ looked in the mirror, he would say, all praises to Allah, oh Allah, just as you have perfected my creation, then perfect my manners. This hadith is da'if. So we don't act upon it. Also, what is mentioned, yusannu at-tatayyub. Tatayyub is using of perfume. This is one of the things that I love about Islam. Yeah. Perfume. The collection is strong, alhamdulillah.
I read something in the book and it was amazing. Like Islam was teaching us how to get our nail armpit.
Yeah, everything.
It was like alhamdulillah.
If you look at the level of cleanliness that Islam has taught mankind, it's unmatched. And sometimes when you see the practices of certain people, even if they're not upon Islam, you can see that they had traces of Islam because of their actions. Because it's Islam that taught us those levels of cleanliness or the certain actions of cleanliness. Subhanallah. But from the things that is recommended for men is tatayyub. For women in the house. At-tatayyub. Naam. Yeah, subhanallah. Yani, tatayyub. It's like a science in itself. It's like a science in itself, the perfume game. But mashallah, this is from the hadith of Anas ibn Malik radhiyallahu anhu, when he says, حُبِّبَ إِلَيَّ مِنَ الدُّنْيا النِّسَاء وَالطِّيبَ. And the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he mentioned that the things that were made beloved to me from this worldly life is an-nisa, women, and tayyib, perfume. So again, it's recommended that a person uses perfume and the likes, especially Yom al-Jum'ah, give it that day that importance. Smell nice. Just as it was prohibited and he warned not to come to the masjid if you don't smell nice. If you smell like onion and the like, you shouldn't come to the masjid. But when you do come to the masjid, make sure you smell nice. Even if you bought a perfume just for when you go to the masjid, like as a man, as a brother, you buy a perfume literally for when I go to the masjid, just to smell nice and pleasant. It's something that is good. Now, also what is mentioned, واستحداد وحف الشارب وتقليم الظفر ونتف الإبط ويجب ختان ذكر وأنثى. So here it mentions the shaving or the shaving of the pubic hair, the trimming of the mustache. So your mustache should not go over your lip. You should not. And unfortunately, some cultures they shave the beard and leave the mustache. They do it the other way around. You're meant to trim the mustache and leave the beard. And it's an obligation to leave the beard. It's a major sin to shave the beard. Also, تقليم الظفر, clipping of the nails. ونتف الإبط, plucking the armpit hair. Even if you shave the armpit hair, this is fine. With a razor or clippers, whatever. As the maqsood, the intention is to remove the hair. And these things should not be left for longer than 40 days, as it came in the hadith of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, that they were commanded not to leave 40 days except that they had trimmed the moustache, shaved the armpits and private areas, and clipped their nails. Also, it mentions in this book, وَيَجِبُ خِتَانٍ, circumcision is obligatory for men and women. Now, what is more correct is not the changes are upon what they changed from. Wallahu a'lam. I'm not saying anything further. Allah musta'an. We're in the days of fitan. Days of fitan. And this is the works of shaitan. He said he's going to do this. He said he's going to come to the people to make them change the creation of Allah Azza wa Jal. You see? Allah musta'an.
Sir, when you come from in the class, in the books and things like that, there's probably if I mention these issues.
Abadan. It was not yatawaqqa. It was not expected. That's why this is the sign that as we get closer to Yawm al-Qiyamah, the things are going to get worse. The way you're seeing people change the creation now is a sign that it's going to get worse. It's going to get worse. And when you see the evil of it, as I mentioned yesterday in yesterday's class, the evil of this thing is who governs it and what's right and what's wrong. Who governs it and what is right and what is wrong. You see? Because why can I say it in one thing but I can't say it in something else? I'm trans race. You see? If we said we're trans race in a Western society, most ethnic minorities will get good jobs. And why I say this, one of the newspapers, they did a test where they done fake CVs, hundreds of fake CVs, all with the same qualifications. And they showed you the percentage of those who were invited to an interview from a particular ethnic group compared to others, even if the other ethnic minorities had more qualifications as well. As we mentioned, institutional racism. Obviously, this is from Allah Azza wa Jal. Allah has allowed this to happen. Doesn't mean Allah is pleased with it, you see. But the things that occur of evil are for another wisdom of good that we may not know about. that we may not know about. But these things exist. But does that mean, if we know, for example, there are institutional racists, that you're not going to get a job? No, it doesn't mean that. And that's where a person needs to tread carefully in understanding qadr. If you don't get a job, it's because Allah did not decree for you to get that job. Not because the person is racist. Okay, let's say the person was racist. Why do you want to work with them anyway? You see? Just say, Alhamdulillah, Allah did not allow this for me. There's something else for me. But what happens when a person starts to say it's from these factors that occur between mankind, they lose connection with Allah Azza wa Jal. And they start blaming everything on color of the skin, is gender, what's discrimination, all of these things. And they neglect that Allah just didn't decree it for you. You see? Yes, there are these factors that are present. But at the same time, you not getting a job, even if that is the reason, is because Allah decreed you didn't get that job. And that's it, khalas. You see? And in all your situations, all of your affairs, you should be able to ask Allah. You should always ask Allah Azza wa Jal to give you that which is best for you. You see? But of the things that is important is one, that a person doesn't go too deep into qadr till they lose their understanding and they fall into disbelief, as that occurred to some. At the time of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he found some of the Sahaba arguing about matters of qadr. And he said, Umirtum bihada, was you commanded with this? He became angry. Because many people that have fallen into disbelief is because of lack of understanding of qadr. Lack of understanding divine decree. And this is very important. هذا في باب آخر إن شاء الله. This is in another discussion of matters of i'tiqad that will be studied at some point also, inshallah ta'ala. So other things that is mentioned here, Ibn Qudama mentions, and he's from the early scholars of Fiqh of the Hanabila, he mentions that al-khitan, circumcision, is wajib upon the men, as what has come in the النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم قال لرجل أسلم ألقي عنك شعر الكفر واختتن. So he mentioned regarding this hadith that when the person embraced Islam, the Prophet Muhammad told him to remove the hair of kufr and get circumcised. So it's an obligation upon man to get circumcised. There's exceptions. Obviously, if a person was to get circumcised and it would lead to a great harm in their health, then there may be exceptions from this. But again, that goes back to the people of takhassus, specialists in that field. It's not for a person just to say on their own behalf, yeah, it's going to cause me harm. You see, so no. Also, what is mentioned, that the waqtul wujub, the age of obligation of circumcision, is عند البلوغ. Person is of the age of maturity. Then it's an obligation. It's recommended obviously to do it beforehand. Because of and whilst at the age of maturity, as long as you are safe from harm. So as long as you are safe from harm. And it mentions وَكَانُوا لَا يَخْتِنُونَ الرَّجُلَ حَتَّى يُدْرِكَ. It mentions they would not circumcise a man until he was aware. But again, this is something that is preferred to do earlier, so there's no harm. But if it's at age of it's an obligation at the age of puberty.
So you mean to remove the hair of kufr, was that in the pubic hairs?
Now. Also, it mentions, okay, so from here it mentions the times of circumcision are of 4. The first, the time of wujub, and that is when you're at the age of maturity, yani puberty. Secondly, the time of prohibition. وقت التحريم is not permissible. And that means إذا خيف الحلاك, يعني, or فساد العدو. Now, for example, this is if you fear that it will lead to your death or yani, self-destruction, or it will yani, harm the private part. It will cause damage to your private part. And the evidence for that is لا تقتلوا أنفسكم. Allah mentions, do not kill yourselves. Secondly, al-mayyit, if a person is dead, bil-ittifaq, with consensus, it's not permissible to circumcise the person who has passed away. Bil-ittifaq, and by agreement, it's not permissible to be done. لِعَدَمِ الْفَائِدَ مِنْهُ, because there's no benefit in that. Okay. Thirdly, وَقْتُ الْإِسْتِحْبَابِ, the time that is recommended. وأشار إليه بقوله وزمن صغر أفضل, and the time of being a youth is better. لأنه أقرب إلى البر. And here, when a person is young, as in the earlier age, it is less harm. There's less possibility of harm. It's safer, and it's easier upon them also. Less harm will come from this. So that is the time that is recommended. So when we mention that a time is wajib, what happens if you don't do it by that time?
Sinful.
You become sinful. So when it says the time of wujub, the time of obligation, if it's not done by then, it becomes a sin. It becomes sinful. The fourth time is waqtul kiraha. Al-waqtul kiraha, or waqtul kiraha, the time that is disliked to be done, is from the day of birth until the 7th day. Between those days, it's disliked. لأنه يخشى على الطفل, because this is feared for the child. وقيل لا يكره لعدم الدليل. قال الشارح لا يثبت في ذلك توقيت فمتى ختن قبل البلوغ كان مصيبا. So it mentions that regarding circumcision before this, there's no evidence for this, that is something that is disliked. But you have those who say it's disliked. You have those who say it's not disliked because there's no evidence that affirms it. So that is matters regarding things of personal hygiene. Things of personal hygiene. And no.
Armpit hair. Is it to be shaved?
I said shaved, however you remove it.
Whatever you mean.
No.
Okay.
La bas. So it says to pluck it, but if you shave it, you clip it, whatever, as long as you remove the hair, the intention has the maqsood, the objective has been fulfilled. Hair removal cream, me personally, I wouldn't recommend hair removal cream though, because these things can be dangerous to one's health. So do due diligence. Like I know a brother, subhanAllah, he was using hair removal cream. A part of it afflicted his beard area and it caused damage. It affected his whole beard. You see? And it affected the skin, everything. So I wouldn't recommend using hair removal cream. I wouldn't recommend it personally. So someone asked, is FGM part of Islam or not? Of course, FGM is not part of Islam. What does FGM stand for?
What is it?
Female genital mutilation.
You listen to that. Female genital mutilation. This is not from Islam, of course not.
Quite a mutilated corpse or quite mutilated.
And that's why we say it's recommended for circumcision of a woman. But it's to be done correctly, not the way that some people done. That they call it Fir'auni. That's what they call it. They call it Fir'auni. Why? Because what did Fir'aun do? He done FGM. Fir'aun did FGM. Because he wanted to remove all desires from the woman. So they no longer had any desire for man. By removing that part of the female genital that Allah has created in them, that was the work of Fir'aun. That's not Islam. You see, so some of these questions in reality we don't actually need to ask. We don't actually need to ask. If a person truly contemplates, then you'll know this is not from Islam. It's not from Islam. And circumcision, it has its benefits. But again, is it an obligation for women? The correct opinion is no. The correct opinion is no. But unfortunately, what you find is some people, some places, because of culture, is something that is forced upon people. Secondly, if, for example, a generation of women had to go through it, sometimes in mankind's natural inclination, you want other people to go through what you went through as well. Mal asaf. Unfortunately, that's the reality of people. That sometimes when they went through something, they want other people to. They feel some form of jealousy that someone's not going through what they went through. Allah al-Musta'an. And you hear stories of parents taking children behind the father's back or the mother's back the other way around and doing it. This is not permissible. This is not permissible. A person needs to fear Allah Azza wa Jal and consult people of knowledge, and things are to be done properly within the hudud al-shara', within the limits of the sharia, within the limits of the sharia. But as we mentioned, what is of the things mentioned, the most correct opinion is that is permissible, sometimes recommended, not that it is an obligation upon the women. Now, so that's of the things regarding personal hygiene. If there's anything else mentioned in other books? No, la. So the next thing to be discussed is al-wudu. Al-wudu. And he mentions that, wal-wudu, what is al-wudu? استعمال ماء طهور في الأعضاء الأربعة على صفة مخصوصة. He mentions that wudu is usage of pure water, and we mentioned that water is of three types or two types according to the opinion that I'm more inclined to. You don't have to be. You might say there's three types of water, but we know that the water that's tahir is no longer what? Water. So tahur, i.e. the water is permissible to be used to purify with. Okay? في الأعضاء الأربعة, in the four limbs, على صفة مخصوصة, in a way that is a specific way. In a specific way. وَالتَّسْمِيَةُ وَاجِبَةٌ. I mentioned a tasmiyah is wajiba. What is tasmiyah? If you hear the word tasmiyah, it means to say Bismillah. It means to say Bismillah. As for basmala, that means to say Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. So this is good to understand some Arabic terminology as we progress. Basmala to say what? Good. Tasmiyah? Bismillah. What's isti'adha? No. Isti'adha? A'udhu billahi min shaitan rajim. What's hawlaqa or hawqala? You see, you hear both. نعم لا حول ولا قوة إلا بالله. نعم تهليل. لا إله إلا الله. نعم تكبير. No, we all know this one. I think even the kuffar know this one. Allah musta'an. If only they knew, yeah. I didn't pay attention to these minute ant-like forms of extremists. I saw a post. It said on Google, if you search up what's the most scariest word, yeah, it said Allahu Akbar. Someone searched that. That's what the result is. Allah musta'an, yani. You see, because sometimes the way people say it, of course, it does make you jump in it. And because of the media, fear enters in people's heart. Like you can never go to a public place and say, Allahu Akbar, for what? Why are you doing that? Even Islamically, that's not something praiseworthy. There's no benefit in that. And also, and you have to also take into consideration the hal of the people that you're among.
Yeah.
You see? So these things a person, and even for da'wah it's not good. Even for da'wah it's not good. But we should teach people, what does Allahu Akbar actually mean? Because this is describing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It's from the sifat of Allah Azza wa Jal.
Yeah, how can that be scary when God is the great, Allah is the great?
Yeah.
You really break it down.
فهذا تعظيم Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. What does, I don't understand what you're mentioning. I don't know what language you're using X to mean. So now, al-wudu. Tasmiyah wajiba, saying Bismillah is wajib, according to the author. فيه وفيه غسل. Also in ghusl. Also when you're making ghusl, you should say Bismillah. What tayammum, and also at the time of tayammum. What is tayammum again? When there's no water present or sick. If you use water, it will cause you harm. If you use water, it will cause you harm. We also mentioned, for example, let's say the time of salah is in the next couple minutes, or the time of salah is entered. You have to pray. The wudu area in the masjid is broken. Hal means condition. Hal means condition. There's no water in the masjid. All the water is broken. But there's a couple shops on the road. What do you have to do? You go and buy water. You have to buy water.
The case for you, say for example, sunrise is about to come in. You woke up and either you haven't got time to make ghusl, or you just have to make wudu and you don't have time. And you miss about this point just to make tayammum and pray, so you catch the waqt.
Some say this, and then you have to make ghusl after this. Allahu A'lam, it needs bahth. I'll look into that. Write it down in a note for me, and I'll look into that one. Because it's something I've heard discussed before, but lam ya'ti ila dhihn al-an. It's not coming to me now.
Imam, I have a question. The Prophet Muhammad
Sallallahu alaihi wasallam.
if you see something bad, you turn with your hand. If you cannot, you turn with your mouth. And if you cannot, you hate it, right?
Yeah, in your heart.
In your heart. Nowadays, they have been teaching us in school this thing of gender, all those things. And sometimes we would like to learn it because it's in the program. So sometimes when I'm learning it, I feel uncomfortable. And it's not something you can discuss in the class openly as well. So I learned to just hate that thing.
That's fun.
And then don't talk. It's even in the, when they ask me a question, I stay neutral. I say, no, I don't know anything about that. Even though I know something is, my religions don't allow me, I just don't want to.
Yeah, you look at the masalih wal mafasid. If you forget to say the basmala, the tasmiyah before wudu, then there's a hadith that mentions لا وضوء لمن لم يذكر اسم الله. There's no wudu for one that doesn't mention Allah. But that hadith is not authentic. So from what I remember studying from one of the Mashaykh, if you forget to say the basmala, it's no problem. You say it when you remember it. You say it when you remember it. Excellent. Okay, as for the hadith that mentions من رأى منكم منكرا فليغيره بيده فإن لم يستطع فبلسانه فإن لم يستطع فيقرأه في قلبه وذلك أضعف الإيمان. Whoever of you sees an evil, let him change it with his hand. If he's not able to, then let him change it with his tongue. If he can't, then let him hate it in his heart, and that's the weakest of Iman. In general, we are all the people of hatred of our heart. Because in the explanation of the hadith, it mentions تغيير باليد, changing by the hand is for the people of sultan, the people of authority, within each capacity. Okay. I'll come back to that about it. So, if, for example, I'm the imam of the masjid, I can change certain things within my capacity. Example, either by way of my hand. If I'm not able to, I can speak about it by way of my tongue based on knowledge. So they mention changing with the hand is for the people of authority. Changing by way of the tongue is for the people of knowledge. You have to have knowledge. then hate it within your heart. This is for the general Muslims. Every Muslim is to hate it within their heart. So you do what is within your capacity, you see. As for the issue of wudu, we mentioned if a person doesn't say the Bismillah at the beginning of the wudu, if they forget, the wudu is still correct and they say it when they remember. They say it when they remember. But if they don't say it, the wudu is still correct. What is also mentioned, you have those who say the saying of the Basmala or the Tasmiyah, saying Bismillah, is mustahabba, is recommended. Because it mentions the ones who describe the wudu of the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu they didn't mention the Tasmiyah. And they mentioned, had it been wajib, it would have been transmitted to us. Had it been an obligation, it would have been transmitted to us. Also, what is mentioned, that there's no hadith that is authentic regarding saying Bismillah. But then you have the hadith of the Prophet Muhammad mentions, and it says, قال طلب بعض أصحاب النبي صلى الله عليه وسلم وضوءا. Some of them had asked for wudu'an, yani water for wudu. Wadu'an. Yani there's wudu and there's wadu. What's the difference between the two? Wudu is the action of wudu. Wadu is the water for wudu. Just changing fatha and dhamma. So you have wadu and you have wudu. And it mentions فقال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم هل مع أحد منكم ماء. Does any of you have water? Does any of you have water? فوضع يده في الماء وقال توضأوا بسم الله. بسم الله. He mentioned that when he asked, does any of you have water? Then he placed his hand in the water, and obviously water started to come from it, and he said, make wudu from this in the name of Allah Azza wa Jal. And actually they say that hadith is used to show that it's something that is recommended, not that it's an obligation. Now, also, of the things that is mentioned, يجب غسل يد القائم من نوم الليل ثلاثا. Now, it mentions that it's an obligation for the one who wakes up from sleep to wash their hands 3 times. And that is taken from min nawm al-layl, from the sleep over the night. That's the deep sleep. The deep sleep, that is because there's different types of sleep. You have nawm al-khafif, you have al-hujur', which means deep sleep as well. You have a number of names that reference any sleep. Now, if it's the sleep that nullifies wudu, that is the deep sleep. The deep sleep is the one that nullifies wudu. So if a person, for example, let's say we're in the masjid and we're in a class and someone nods off. But if you call their name, they'll get up straight away. Is that a deep sleep? No. So you don't say go make wudu. Unless you heard something come from them, they passed wind or something that they weren't aware of. Okay? But if it's not a sleep where you have zawal al-aql, the illah is zawal al-aql, the loss of consciousness. The loss of consciousness. That's why not only is it sleep, but also if a person loses consciousness and faints, for example, then also has a time to make wudu. So I mentioned in this part that a person who wakes up from sleep overnight, the deep sleep that breaks wudu, they should wash their hands. It's a wajib to wash their hands 3 times. That's what's mentioned in the book. لحديث أبي هريرة قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم إذا استيقظ أحدكم من نومه فلا يغمس يده في الإناء حتى يغسلها 3 فإنه لا يدري أين باتت يده. Bukhari or Muslim. So here it mentions in this hadith, when one of you wakes up from his sleep, then do not put his hand in the vessel where he's going to make wudu from. Because for those times, for example, you wouldn't have a running tap. You'd have a vessel that water was stored in. So don't put your hand in the vessel until you have washed it 3 times. Because none of you knows where his hand spent the night. None of you knows where his hand has spent the night. And it says, وَالْبَيْتُوتَ لَا تَكُونُ إِلَّا بِاللَّيْلِ. Al-Baytuta is the masdar of the verb bata. So what's the word for house? Baytun. Where does it come from? The verb bata. You say bata laylahu. He spent his night. So bata means wherever you remain overnight. So you can say, for example, bata laylahu sajidan lillah. He spent his night in prostration to Allah Azza wa Jalla, praying to Allah. You see, so we get from this word baytun, bata, that this is only referring to something overnight. That's why they mentioned from this, that is the sleep that you wake up from sleeping overnight. You see the relationship? And it mentions biniyatin wa tasmiyatin, that it also has to be based on intention. You have to make intention and say Bismillah. لحديث عمر رضي الله عنه قال قال رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم إنما الأعمال بالنيات. Yani that's the hadith that enters in every bab of fiqh. The actions are by intentions. وتسمية قياسا على الوضوء. And they mention that they say tasmiyah, yani also for when you're washing your hand. قياسا على الوضوء, yani this is based on analogy towards the wudu. And you comparative analogy with the wudu. And it mentions يجب غسلهما من النوم الليل والنوم النهار لأن العلة وهي قوله فإنه لا يدري أين باتت يده متحققة في النوم الليل والنهار والحكم يدور مع علته وجودا وعدما أما لفظ البيتوتة فخرج مخرج الغالب. So here it mentions, in this portion it mentions it's obligatory to wash his hands whether he woke up from sleep in the night or in the daytime. Why? Because the illah, the reasoning is still there. Whether you slept at night time or whether you slept in the daytime. Let's say, for example, a person works at night and they sleep during the day, right? That sleep during the day is a normal sleep that person does during the night. So even the word batat here, you feed al-baytuta. The benefit is spending the night. But this is fil ghalib, majority of the time. Because the ada, the norm, is that a person sleeps overnight, not during the day. The norm is that a person sleeps during the night, not during the day. So it mentions that this applies to whether you're sleeping during the day or sleeping during the night. And it mentions وَمَسْأَلَ شُرُوطِ الْوُضُوءِ وَلَوْ مُسَحَبًّا ثَمَانِيَةً. It mentions the conditions of wudu, and whether, even if they're recommended, they are 8. And you have some who say there's 9. The first of them, انقطاع ما يوجبه. The first of those conditions of wudu is انقطاع ما يوجبه, that you stop whatever necessitates wudu. For example, let's say I break wind, I pass wind. So what does that mean? إذا خرج مني الريح لابد من الوضوء. If I pass wind, I have to make wudu. So let's say I go to make wudu, but during the whole time I'm passing wind, have I stopped what necessitates wudu? Has it come to an end? La. So I have to stop passing wind before I make wudu. If I start making wudu, I pass wind, I have to start again. واضح? Is that clear? Is it clear?
Yeah, so
What's not clear?
so in the middle of the wudu.
You pass wind, you start again.
Okay.
Because it's batil now. You see?
Because Lord, I don't remember in our childhood what has been told is because you haven't finished the wudu yet.
لا. You have to انقطاع ما يوجب الوضوء. نعم. لازم من الانقطاع. You have to stop that which is going to break the wudu. You see? It's like a person, أفان الله وإياكم, urinating and making wudu like this at the same time. You have to finish qada al-haja, remember we went to the difference of opinion whether you have to clean yourself first or not before making wudu. But then you cannot make wudu whilst you're urinating, because that thing breaks wudu itself. So you have to stop what breaks wudu and then you make wudu. You see? Second of the conditions is an-niyyah, the intention. That's from the hadith that we mentioned, إِنَّمَا الْأَعْمَالُ بِالنِّيَّاتِ. Why do you have to have intention? Let's say it's a hot day and I'm wearing a t-shirt and 3/4 lengths and some sliders and I'm hot. So I wash all the parts of my body and it looks like I'm making wudu, but my intention is just to cool down. Can I pray with that? La. Because I have to have the intention that I am making wudu. Ay lis-salah, so that I can pray. Okay? So that's why it's important that you have the correct intention.
So,
No.
so before you take a shower, normal shower, it's not the wajib, normal shower, you make a bismillah intention and just need to go under the shower, that's it? Or do you have to explicitly wash?
There's two types of ghusl. Ghusl al-kamil
Yeah.
and ghusl yani mujzi.
Yeah.
Mujzi means it fulfills the objective. So if I went under, if there was water, let alone shower, let's say there was a sea,
Yes.
and I just ran, and I'm in a state of janaba. I have the intention of what? Ghusl. I say Bismillah. I dive in, rinse nose and mouth. Khalas, come out, I'm done. You see? But the kamil is by doing the wash the private parts first, wash your hands, make wudu, leave your feet till last. Right side of the body, left side of the body. That will come, inshallah, the sifatul ghusl. That will come.
No, this is a normal daily ghusl, you know, that you normally do it.
Yeah, a normal shower.
Yeah, normal shower.
What's the difference?
So
You see?
you don't have to wash it explicitly.
What's the difference between the two? I mentioned, if I said for janaba, what about normal shower? You see?
Sometimes we don't, you know, in the shower you don't rinse.
No, rinse your nose and mouth. While you're in the shower, rinse your nose and mouth. It's easy, khalas.
You can do normal shower and then later you take when you
No,
finish-
you did it at the same time. Why are you gonna do two?
Oh, I always I take shower like when I finish, then I'll do the dana.
La, it's the same.
Abba is the same, so it's not.
What's the difference? If I'm in a state of janaba, I go in the shower. I got two options. I can wash my private parts first, then wash my hands, then make wudu for salah, and leave my feet, like my feet up to my ankles. Then I wash the right side of my body, then the left side of my body, then my feet up to my ankles. That's complete. Or I can get my whole self wet, normally, with the intention of ghusl, and rinse my nose and mouth, and that's it, I'm done. Both is permissible, but one is akmal, one is more complete, so it's more reward for doing so. You see? A person asked if you are in the salah, the final tashahhud. You're in the final tashahhud. The imam is just about to say as-salah, like this, and you go,
I'll hold it.
you have to pray again. You have to leave. You have to make wudu. You have to do it all over again. Now,
But are you allowed to hold it? Because you are
yeah, obviously, in that moment, yeah.
Yeah.
But in the beginning of the salah, it's disliked. It's not that it's haram. It's disliked to be done. So look, what the first thing we started to talk about when we spoke about fiqh is the types of ahkam. We said wajib, haram, mubah, makruh, mustahab. Why did we mention this? Because now I can apply it to issues. So if I say something's makruh, something is disliked now, if I do it, am I gaining any sin? No. This is how generous and how merciful Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is. If it was things that were disliked and you get sin for it, khalas, we're finished. There's so much things. You see? That it's not ideal, it's not the most recommended situation. But if you pass wind in the final tashahhud, you have to make wudu and do the prayer again. Enjoy it. You get to pray to Allah Azza wa Jal. You get the reward of being patient upon His obedience. You see? You get reward for it. It's not like and this is what we live for. We live for the salah. The issue, we are the other way round, like we're backwards. The Prophet Muhammad ﷺ found pleasure in salah. We find the salah to be a nuisance, ma'al-asaf. May Allah rectify our affairs. But we hasten the salah, we rush the salah, we get angry if the salah is taking long, and all these things. We're backwards.
Just go outside and stand and talk.
One sheikh, he said it, I was there, he said it to me. Wallahi, he said one person, he was in the masjid, and he had to lead the salah, and the person was like, Sheikh, asri. Yalla, al-waqt, yani, come on, it's time. It's time for salah, Sheikh, yani. So he rushed him. The Sheikh said, okay. He went and he prayed, he led the salah. After the salah, what did he do? He went and followed that person, said, hey, started talking to him for long. Just talking to him for long. And the Sheikh said to him at the end, look, you rushed me for salah. Just for a short period of time, you rushed me. And then you allowed me to take all of this time from things from the worldly life. This is backwards. Assalamu This is when we actually realize the issues that we have and how far we may be from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. When we see acts of worship as a burden. Because Allah doesn't command us to do much. If you think about it, your daily salawat does not take 1 hour of your day. Altogether, it doesn't take 1 hour of your day. Even when it comes to work, we're shy to ask people that are employing us about matters to do with salah. But the kuffar, do you think, and those who smoke, do you think they're shy to ask for a 5-10 minute cigarette break? They're not shy, they demand it. You don't even allow them, they're going to fight it. But when it comes to salah, he's going to get upset if I pray, he's going to fire me. We don't fear Allah Azza wa Jal. We have no shyness from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We're shy from the person who is not our source of rizq. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the source of rizq. He's just a sabab, he's just a means. And you make one dua, if he's oppressive, Allah may change him for something better. Then he's the one who's lost the rizq now. Why? Because Allah is the one who gives rizq. To both those who are any believers and who are non-believers. Of the things that aid you in loving acts of worship as well, is understanding the fiqh behind it. Because when you have more knowledge about the salah, you're going to enjoy it more. When you have more knowledge about the acts of worship, what's going to happen? You're going to try your best to make sure you're doing them. I learned this. I've never been taught wudu properly. I've never been let the condition of wudu. So let me make sure I'm making my wudu properly. Why? Because I'm trying to copy the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. It will have a major impact on your acts of worship. Everything will change for you. When you worship Allah upon knowledge, you will realize the difference of worshiping Allah upon ignorance. It's like even when you recite, you might recite the same surah all the time. But every month or so, as a person who seeks knowledge, that same surah might hit you differently. Because every time you gain more knowledge, what happens? You gain more understanding about Allah Azza wa Jal. So you might hear ayat that you hear all the time and you realize, hold on. For example, I like to recite the end of Surah Al-Hashr a lot. In this last page of Surah Al-Hashr, it's always telling you about not being of like those who forget about the hereafter. Don't forget about the hereafter. Don't forget about Allah Azza wa Jalla. And after telling you this, Allah tells you this, He also tells you many of His names and attributes. So every time, if you're actually thinking about Allah's names and attributes, you're going to ponder over those same ayat differently every single time. No one gets bored of Surah Al-Fatiha. No one. But if you find that you're bored of the Quran, it's because you don't understand it. You don't understand it. Imagine the shortest surah in the Quran, one of them, Surah Al-Ikhlas. But if you know the meaning of Surah Al-Ikhlas, you will never get bored of saying it. And that's why one of the Sahaba, he would say it all the time. To the point the Sahaba complained about him. He might recite Baqarah, then he'll finish with Ikhlas. They complained about it because for them, one, it was strange, and it also becomes something that maybe they weren't too comfortable with. So they went to the Prophet ﷺ, and then he asked, why? Why does he always do this? They asked him. He said, because it's Sifatul Rahman. وَأَنَا أُحِبُّهَا. Because this surah describes Ar-Rahman. It describes who? Allah Azza wa Jal. So I love it. And then what did the Prophet ﷺ say? Inform him, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala loves him because of his love for this surah. He loves the speech of Allah. So he loves Allah. Because of this, it's describing Allah. But when we find that, if we ever find that we're getting bored of the Quran, then we have to ask Allah to rectify the sickness that has afflicted our heart. If you find yourself, and you'll notice the difference between a person who truly understands the book of Allah Azza wa Jal, they're not just amazed by the voices. The voice is a bonus. This is a gift from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Not everyone has the ability to recite like the most famous of Qur'an that you know. But that person that may not have the nicest voice, he might understand the Qur'an more though. And when he recites, he reflects that. But some people, they weep based on the sound. Anything that sounds nice is going to attract this person. But one who weeps from the meaning, this is the one who benefits the most. This one who benefits the most. So this is the goal, inshallah ta'ala, why we are studying Islam, why we're studying the fiqh of worship. Because from this we gain those fruits of at-taladdud bil-ibadah. That you gain the sweetness, you taste the sweetness of acts of worship of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. We'll stop here inshallah ta'ala as the adhan needs to be called. As I mentioned, don't be shy to tell me the time, inshallah, because it runs away. But Allah yubarak feekum, jazakumullah khairan, wa salli wa sallam ala nabiyyina wa habibina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'een. We'll continue inshallah next lesson regarding more things to do with the conditions of al-wudu, inshallah ta'ala. Fa jazakumullah khairan, wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.